Well, I've just published a book of short stories called Engglishh, spelled Enggglish. This is actually really representative of the kind of direction my fiction is going. For several years now, I've actually not written the conventional short story or the conventional story which has characters and a narrative arc. I find myself adopting the tone of a corporation, a marketing agency, somebody trying to sell something, and I just find myself gravitating towards the voice. I work in a company and I realize that how deeply and how universally we are all actually really dictated by corporations. So when the corporation speaks and the tone it adopts and the lies it says and the kind of pussyfooting it indulges in, I find that extremely riveting. So a lot of pieces in this current collection of short stories capture that voice, capture that tone. But of course there is an equal balance of the conventional short stories that were written a few years ago before I began this direction into experimentation. Well, the title is spelled this way because there's actually a short story called Engglishh, and the short story is in the form of, again, a marketing pamphlet that a publishing house is passing around, advertising or kind of publicizing the fact that they've published a new book called Engglishh, which introduces a numerologically auspicious way of spelling the English language. And they say that English is the most inauspiciously spelled language, and here we have Engglishh certified by extremely respected numerologists and following the grand Vedic traditions and the Indo-Puranic traditions of making sure that every word is spelt correctly according to the Sanskrit fashion of rata, the correctness. So the title story is this almost 8-page rant about why you must switch to English and respell all your English communication in English and completely basically mangle up the language. It's possible, right? Because we are so used. That's what I said. When I began saying, I said I haven't written the conventional story in a long time. So there is a kind of blurring of genre. There is a blurring of boundary. What do you call this? Do you call this the essay? Again, I don't think it would be called the essay, because at the end of the day, this is fiction. This is me imagining a corporation, of course, speaking or trying to approximate how a corporation or a publishing house or a business organization would work or speak to its potential customers or its potential employees. But yes, at the end of the day, this is fiction. So I suppose this is a new form of lies, which we are all surrounded by 24 hours a day. I wouldn't call myself anti, because I think that option is no longer existing. You cannot be anti-corporation anymore, because they have invaded almost all aspects of our lives, and irrevocably they are there to stay. There is no turning back now. But having said that, I am not willing to yield so easily. So I suppose every piece that I write is a kind of me pushing back a little bit as an individual, as a human being who works in a corporation, who consumes corporate produced products, who is continuously kind of drowning in corporate speak and advertising and marketing spiel. This is my way of pushing back. A writer I really respect, I forget his name, he says, when you go online, everything is up for satire, except the marketing, advertising video that you have to see before your YouTube link loads, or except for that ad which gets flashed and you have to close the button to access the article that you're there on the website to read. So I think it's time for us to begin to poke fun at something that is so right there, and it is so easy to miss, the marketing spiel, the advertising. But I think, yes, this is my attempt to push back somewhere. I did in my first book. I addressed the question of being someone of Muslim descent, of being born in an Ismaili Khoja family. So No God in Sight really emerged from the fact that I grew up in a ghetto in Bombay, in central Bombay, and I've said this many times, but when I began writing the book, for many months and for almost a couple of years, I struggled with trying to write because I wanted to write this pan-Bombay novel. It's only, after several failed attempts at actually being able to write, I realized that the fact was that I had grown up in a ghetto in central Mumbai, a Muslim ghetto, and that was the reality I knew most intimately, And when I kind of finally abandoned the possibility of having to write about the Gujarati trader or the Sindhi businessman and just allowed myself to map out the collective consciousness of all the people I had been seeing and watching and grew up with from the time I was a child, that's when the novel really began, or the book really began flowing, the stories really began coming to me. I examined the aspect, the identity of being a Muslim from various angles in the book. From the angle of somebody who is angry about feeling the way he feels as a person of minority religion in a country like this, to a person who is so filled with revulsion for his own religion that he wants to abandon it and adopt a Hindu identity and a Hindu religion. So I tried to explore the entire spectrum of responses to this. But again, at the end of the day, I am not only a Muslim. There are many aspects to my personality. I also practice Buddhist meditation. I am also married to a non-practicing woman of Hindu Sindhi descent. So it is there in the back of the mind, the politics of it, but I can't allow it to override my fiction at all times. Good question, and shame on me for not knowing the number offhand immediately, but I would say around 15 to 16 of them. No, they've been, some of them were written almost a decade ago. Some of them were written in the past 2-3 years. Many of them have been published around the world in various anthologies and publications and all that stuff. But really, when I brought them all together, there was such a kind of thematic coherence to them that they all flowed. They didn't feel like they were just stuck on because there was a necessity to publish a book, which is why I actually allowed this book to be published, because I'm not a great fan of publishing for the heck of it. I really want each book to have a sense of shelf life and a sense of coherence to it, even though it may be disparate stories. Well, it's a good question you're asking, and I think my attempt to experiment with voice began when the time I was actually writing my first book. So there is a piece here called An Indian Porn Director's Speech to His Hesitant Leading Lady, which was supposed to have been in my first book, but it didn't fit in there because the milieu was not there. But I was already kind of flirting with the marketing spiel, the organization trying to pressure somebody into something. There is another story here which I also wrote several years ago about a chain store mascot clown coming to life, and how he gets rogered by all these anti-globalization activists who suddenly realize that this could be our mascot, this could be our anti-globalization icon, So I was already flirting with the way the corporate is invading the personal space and the way the personal space is fighting back. But I think as I grow older, I'm in my late 30s now, that stance is getting more and more stronger, and that's actually the only thing I really want to do.